In the next few minutes, we are going to focus our attention on the lives of women who are culturally different. The lives of these women are in a state of constant change that has tremendous economic, social, and psychological impact. We will see how this impact affects the lives of 4 such women, using their perspectives to gain further knowledge of our different cultures. The facts and conditions of poverty in the central city affecting elderly women and women heads of households are becoming more severe. In 1972, the median income for female heads of households over 65 was half of the amount for male heads of households over 65. For white females under 65, the ratio of incomes of white females to that of white males remains the same, just about half. Black females, on the other hand, had incomes that amounted to less than 1/3 of that of white males, a little over 1/2 of that of white females, and slightly more than 1/3 of that of black males. The proportion of single-parent families headed by women increased by 33% in the last decade. The proportion of families headed by women is greatest among poorly educated and minority groups residing in the central cities. There is also considerable difference among racial and ethnic groups in the proportion of families headed by women. In 1973, for instance, 10% of all white families, 14% of all Spanish-speaking heritage families, and 35% of all black families were headed by women. The belief still persists that a woman's whole sense of identity and major source of satisfaction depends solely on her home, her husband's job, and her children. For some women, this belief has had little meaning. Richard Smuts, in his History of the Working Women in America, clarified the relationship between the social and economic status of women when he said, "The family has had to have the means to support its women in sheltered idleness before it could come to believe that this was their natural state." Poor women, for whom staying at home has rarely been an option, and whose lifestyle has seldom corresponded to the stereotype of women's place in the home, have been relatively unaffected by the movement of the majority. The 1890 census showed an employment rate for black women to be more than twice that for white women. Almost all of the 100,000 married women in domestic service in 1890 were black. With the growing number of women in the labor force, the margin of difference between the percent of employed black women and white women has been narrowing. However, black women with the longest history of work experience have benefited the least from rising economic standards. Aretha Faust, who has been working for the welfare of the poor for a number of years, gives insight on the far-reaching effects of this situation.
Things are really tough for one-parent families, not because it was just started out a one-parent family, because probably the most time the father left or got killed or a little bitty nothing got him in jail or something, and it had really made it hard for the mother and children.
Mm-hmm. And what are the specifically problems that they might face?
They're facing, most of the time they're facing, and all the time they're facing, keeping enough money to pay bills and having a decent place to live and having the utility bills, keeping everything up and going as a need of human people have to have. It's a tough thing just to work every day to keep going. It's a struggle for them to go. Sometimes some of us hit it pretty lucky, and some of us is just still struggling as old times. That's what I can feel is really there.
Mm-hmm. And when they start work, does this seem to solve their basic?
No, it don't solve the problem at all when they start working, because what you get then, you still have your family, and you still have your utility bills and everything, and you still have your children. Then you are added things you have. You have to have money then for transportation, clothes, extra food. Sometimes when you go to work, you got a special meeting you got to go to, and when you go to that meeting, sometimes you don't have time to come home and cook beans or make some special big something, for the need of your health for yourself and children. You're eating like sometimes from a sack or hamburgers, that's what kids like to eat, but that's not really what they need.
I've heard this over and over again. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. That's one of your slogans, isn't it?
Yes.
Well, how can an individual be a part of the solution?
Well, coming out and getting involved with the people that really have the problem, not assuming, And I would say that is come out and get with the organizations and individual persons who is working hard, because if you've never been in that condition, I've always heard another slogan from another person, you have to be there to do that. You have to, you can't come from somewhere where you haven't went to, and you can't teach something that you don't know.
Can't get cooperation from the school, how are you going to know what your child is doing? This is what I want to know. I don't have no kick myself, because I go out to the schools where my children are, and I don't should be with their children. You go to the schools, you talk to the principal, right? But you can't talk to that teacher. That teacher is the one you need to talk to. She's the one or he's the one that's dealing with your child, not that principal. And then you get those down slips. Your child be out of school maybe 5 or 6 or 7 weeks maybe. Maybe that's stretching it a little. Then you get a slip, Joe Brown ain't been to school. Well, what you gonna do? You didn't know they weren't there. You working. You see them get on that school bus. But if you're not notified before then, hey, what you gonna do?
One-parent families functioned as a self-sufficient economic unit in 1890 when the population was predominantly agricultural. At the turn of the century, many American women still were responsible for making all the family's food and nursing and educating the young. But by 1920, more than half of the population had moved to the cities. Today, almost 3/4 of the population live in urban areas, and over 95% of the population make their living from non-agricultural pursuits. I asked Pauline Blum of the Mid-America All-Indian Center about the economic and cultural needs of Native American women.
Well, the Indian woman has and always has had a lot of cultural things going on in her life all the time. That is, what I mean by cultural is she's keeping up with Indian history, her heritage, learning to do all these old-time crafts and arts, and that includes also dancing, singing, storytelling, and so forth. And so she's pretty well up on cultural things, but very low on economic things. I think maybe their economic need is greater than their cultural need as far as that goes.
A number of significant trends indicate that American women's aspirations have changed profoundly since the turn of the century. These changes often fail to be recognized. Women today wish to take a larger part in society, and their growing assumption of activities and responsibilities reflects this. Women, increasingly well-educated and independent, do not wish to be restricted. 50% of the women who call Kelly Bourgeois at the Information and Referral Service of the Commission on the Status of Women are just this type.
But those women call because they know where to call.
I see.
They have the knowledge of the community, where to go. The Commission on the Status of Women represent all women, rights and remedies. They know that they can call, and if I don't have an answer, I tell them I will take your number and I will call you back. and I will work for them. If I have to go to the library, if I have to go to people that are authorities on the subject, whatever it takes to help those women with their problems.
Would you find specific problems with these women?
Mainly, I think, is the being turned down because they are a woman. They would have the education, they would have the a good job, the means to pay for what they buy, but they find it very hard sometimes when they are turned down for credit because they are a woman. And they rebel. They not exactly rebel, but they question. They don't accept anymore the educated women, somebody telling them, we can't give you credit. They question, why can't you give me credit?
They challenge more.
They challenge more. On the other hand, a welfare recipient feels that if somebody tells them that they are not going to get the credit, they accept it because they know that their circumstances are such as receiving welfare. Accept being turned down. They don't question why. Sometimes the women that are on welfare decide that when I tell them of their rights or give them information, they decide that they don't want to do anything about it. It's not worth fighting for that right because they are concerned about survival, their children, food and shelter, paying their bills. The educated women have the time and less worries as far as the basics of life, where they can go and pursue a solution to why they're being turned down in any employment, credit, whatever.
A change in women's economic roles thus holds the potential for substantially modifying most of our institutions. Nevertheless, institutions change slowly, and those involved in community development decisions have tended to perpetuate social patterns without question, even though many of these patterns are at variance with the facts. Yolanda Huffman is a working mother who is very much concerned about the influence our institutions have on family life.
You and I have talked before about problems facing minority women, especially minority women with children. You see your children now facing the same problems you faced as a child. Do you see these problems being eliminated through today's educational process?
Not really. In some respects, I would tend to believe that the value differences between ethnic cultures and the educational system cause conflicts, and these conflicts carry on into the job. A specific one I can think of is the competitive individualism, which is encouraged through the traditional educational system.
Yes.
This, of course, is contradictory to the general lifestyle of minorities as a whole. For example, society would like or dictates that we should prove oneself to be better than the other. At the same time, it implies that we should all be winners. On the other hand, cultural values uphold the importance of one's contribution as part of the community. But at the same time, we always try to remember the benefit and the welfare of the others. And, we continue to carry this as part of our something that we understand should be done at all times. I also feel that the burden of proof rests heavier on the minority woman
than on any other because she is minority. There is constant pressure being applied to disprove her competency on the job and or to question the quality of her performance.
Are you getting any relief from these pressures?
I would tend to believe that it would be, while it would be nice to feel that we could get this relief, I think lack of a supportive environment also causes or erects barriers, which unless, these barriers are removed, the productive mobility of minority women is going to be hindered, and
this is where she suffers.
Right, in the workforce, these barriers must be overcome before we can reach this level of mobility.
Then what would you say about the opportunities that are available to women today?
Opportunities are not as available as we have been led to believe. The reality is that there cannot be room at the top for everyone.
For an analysis of the 4 perspectives of women who are culturally different, I've asked John Gaston, who is a member of the faculty at Wichita State University, to give his views on the main areas of concern.
One of the things that I have very strong feelings about is that it is morally wrong for any individual to not be able to develop their potential. And I think that this is a concern, especially that we get into in the cases of so-called poor women who are not allowed the opportunity to develop the potential that they have because of economic reasons. They are limited to a rather small place in life as far as advancement and opportunity is concerned. And so as a result of that, that's wasted potential. And I think that this should be a concern that we'd have to make some means available whereby women who might fall in this category would be able to pursue whatever their areas of interest are to the extent that they're capable of doing that. And I think we would all, as a society and as individuals, profit from that.
Would you say that being culturally different compounds the problem of being poor? And if so, what kind of solution would a woman who is culturally different try to pursue?
What minority women are basically faced with is a situation of whether or not they're going to give up a certain amount of their cultural background in order to pursue economic or social goals. And I think that becomes a very serious problem, especially in the case of Mexican American women. I think it's a real problem in the case of Native American women because you have something that I think people should be very proud of, their cultural background. And if we're going to get into the mainstream of society, if we're going to function there, then it does require a sacrifice of giving up some of those things. I think it's an additional problem, or perhaps an advantage in some cases, for younger women who are coming on, that they don't have some of the restrictions that perhaps older women have. If you have a woman who already has a family, then I think this is certainly going to affect the role that she can assume, the kinds of goals that she will be able to pursue, and the extent to which she'll be successful in that. So I think that becomes a major concern. But younger women who are just beginning to look for careers and so forth, they have the option of saying, well, maybe I don't want a family right now, or maybe they don't want a family at all. And so they can put 100% of their energy, or whatever percentage they would like, into pursuing their goals. But in the case where a woman has a family, that is a responsibility that she has to deal with, and she must come to grips with the question of to what extent can she leave her family and pursue some of the things that she's capable of and really would like to pursue. And I see this as being a very difficult problem to come to grips with.
Wouldn't you say that women don't want to really have to make a choice so much as to derive benefits from as many different areas as possible? For example, you take the Mid-America All Indian Center, which is a cultural center.
Wouldn't you say that more of these would help alleviate the having to live in, say, two worlds?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer, Carol, in a sense, because on one hand you have a program that's providing more of an awareness, which I think the center is doing, which I think is very important. But beyond that awareness, you have the individual who must say, okay, as a result of this awareness of the public and of my own culture, how is it going to affect me? What am I going to do? And in reality, in the economic world, we must at some point leave our culture and pursue those economic kinds of goals, which in many cases have little, if anything at all, to do with our cultural background. If one is fortunate enough to pursue a career that is centering around their culture and their cultural interests, then I think you have that option. But in the case of, say, the business world, in the case of politics or some similar kinds of pursuit, you don't have, in most cases, the option of really getting into the cultural aspects to any great extent, other than that of looking at it from the standpoint of a potential consumer of a given culture or a potential voter from a given culture. And in that case, it's beneficial to know about cultural differences. But as far as some of the other aspects of it, I think you're somewhat limited.
However, a new role model for women can now be seen in the business sector of society. This model functions as a cultural image that has been accepted into the American mainstream.
Sharon.
Hi, Lee. How are you?
Fine.
Good to see you. Come on in.
Good to see you.
We've really enjoyed working up your figures.
Well,
and
good.
The project looks like it's going to be really good, successful for you. Make a lot of money.
Fine. That's
so.
what I like to
yeah,
hear.
right.
Could I see the
You
figures?
sure could. What you'll notice is that we've done two kinds of things for you. We've developed both the startup cost figures, and we've tried to make an analysis of what the owner is offering you. And
What about that figure right there?
okay, this figure here is one that
We bring models into the class, and I think this is wonderful for black and white and other students alike to see a very successful businesswoman, a black businesswoman, very self-confident, very assured, successful in any terms you want to think of success, and you know, it sort of blows their minds, and they think, well, she's successful, and she's a woman, and she's a black woman. So it's sort of like she becomes a model that everyone can look up to, including the white students.
Dr. Walters, who is Associate Professor of English, is also coordinator of the Women's Studies program at Wichita State University. Dr. Walters, how is the Women's Studies program designed to benefit minority women?
This has been a primary concern of women's studies since our beginning. We were developed by a committee which included minority women from town and from the university. And so it was in our thinking from the first as to consider how we could benefit all women, including minority women. I would say we serve, in our program, we serve minority women best in two ways. One is through special courses directed at minority interests, such as our Minority Women in Society, which has to do with American society. That, of course, is, like most of our courses, is taught through another department. We don't teach many classes through our own department, our own area.
Yes.
We simply cross-list them into our program. But Minority Studies here on the campus does have a course that's been offered now for several years, and it's been very successful. And it is called Minority Women in America. And that is directed to the special interests and concerns of our minority women. Now, the second way we try to serve minority women is through inclusion of materials in our courses that pertain to minority interests. Thus, we have another course which is called Women in Society. I will agree that mainly it focuses on majority women in society. But we definitely include materials relating to minority women, what their concerns are, what their problems are, what their interests are, particularly as those might be different from the typical white middle-class American female. And I think we learn a lot from our students in that class, because often they tell us this doesn't apply to us. And so together we explore what are the differences, what are the similarities. We have faculty, minority women faculty teaching various areas of our program. We have minority faculty on our minority women on our executive committee for women's studies, and I think this is neat. We have minority women teaching the course that's just called Women in Society. So I think, I really think this is a kind of progress, because this means that we're really not thinking so much in terms of is a person this or that. We're thinking in terms of this is a woman, a woman faculty in our society. I think it's very good for the students to have this kind of model.
So do you have anything for a woman from the community who might come into the department and simply ask for advice?
We're always glad to counsel and give whatever help we can. We don't have paid counselors, but just as faculty, sure, we're always glad to do whatever we can for anybody who comes.
In summary, we have seen economic instability as the major concern of women. Also, it was cited to be the cause for breakdown in the family structure. An increasing need for cultural expression and interpretation was emphasized, as well as relief from psychological pressures brought about by multi-problem situations. It is the hope of myself and others that this information will bring about an awareness for more change in social attitudes, which ultimately new modes of behavior will bring about.